My daughter-in-law called me legally stupid in court. I smiled, handed the judge my credentials, and said, I served on the State Bar Disciplinary Board. Her lawyer immediately asked for a recess. My daughter-in-law moved into my house supposedly just for a few weeks. By the third day, she was already packing up my good china, opening my mail, and figuring out which nursing home I belonged in. Then she dragged me into court and called me legally stupid. I just smiled, opened my leather portfolio, and handed the judge the one ID her lawyer really should have checked first. When I walked into the kitchen, my daughter-in-law, Kelsey, was already loading my expensive china into a moving box. We don't need this stuff anymore. It's just taking up space, Kelsey said casually, not even looking up. My son Caleb stood there silently scratching the back of his neck. It was only the third day since he and Kelsey had temporarily moved into my house while their apartment was being renovated. I didn't sigh. I didn't cry. I walked over to the box, took each plate out one by one, and put them back in the cabinet. These stay right here, I said in a perfectly calm voice. Kelsey's eyes widened, but we need the room for our spices and the blender. I closed the cabinet door, locked it, and slipped the key into my pocket. Then you'll have to find another spot for that blender. There was no fight, no raised voices. I turned and walked into the living room. I already knew this arrangement was going to be a lot harder than anyone wanted to admit. Kelsey had a habit of claiming spaces like they already belonged to her. That evening, we sat down for dinner. She cooked and was dishing out the plates. I got the smallest one. At your age, you don't need all those carbs, she announced, uninvited. Caleb stared at his own plate and mumbled something I couldn't catch. I took one bite, set my fork down, stood up, and went to the fridge. I pulled out some good cheese and fresh bread, and quietly made myself a real meal. Kelsey watched me with narrowed eyes. I stood in here for an hour, she said sharply. And I like to eat something that actually tastes good, I answered evenly. I knew I had to set clear boundaries right then and there. The little power plays in my own house were already obvious. I wasn't about to play the victim. Late that night, after the house went quiet, I grabbed an empty box and quietly rearranged a few things in the kitchen. When Kelsey came down the next morning to make coffee, she got a nasty little surprise. I had already made my move. Kelsey stood there stunned, staring at the empty counter where my nice espresso machine had been the day before. Caleb, she yelled down the hall. I was already sitting at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, peacefully reading the newspaper. Where's the machine? She demanded as she stormed in. In my room, I said without looking up. I like drinking my coffee in peace in the mornings and I wanted to stay clean. Kelsey gasped. That is ridiculous. We're all living here together now. We share everything. I calmly turned the page. We share the house, Kelsey. We don't share my personal things. Caleb shuffled in, still half asleep, looking back and forth between us. Mom, isn't that a little much? He asked quietly. I looked him straight in the eye. No, it's mine. That was the end of the discussion for me. Kelsey was fuming, but didn't say another word. She made herself some cheap drip coffee instead. That afternoon, she came into the living room with a thick notebook. We need to talk about finances, she said in her best boss lady voice. Since we're living here, we should pool grocery money. You give me $600 a month and I'll handle all the shopping. It's more efficient. I set my book down. I knew exactly what she was after. She wanted control of the household money. I reached into my purse, took out my wallet, and laid a $50 bill on the table. That's for shared stuff like cleaning supplies and toilet paper. I'll buy my own groceries. Kelsey stared at the bill. You can't be serious. How am I supposed to plan anything? I gave her a small smile, but my eyes stayed serious. You plan for the two of you. I'll plan for myself. Simplest solution. Her hand shook a little with bottled-up anger as she snatched the 50. She was starting to realize her usual tricks weren't working on me. But Kelsey wasn't ready to quit. She already had a new plan brewing. A few days later, I noticed my mail wasn't landing on the hallway table like usual. I found my letters neatly stacked on the kitchen counter. The envelope on my latest bank statement was slightly torn, like someone had tried to peek inside. I picked up the stack face completely calm. I didn't march over to confront Kelsey. I wasn't wasting energy on arguments that would only get me excuses. Instead, I went to my bedroom, opened my laptop, and set up a forwarding order in 10 minutes flat. Everything would now go to a P.O. box only I had the key for. The next day at lunch, Kelsey asked casually, "No mail today? I thought you were expecting some papers." I kept eating. "My mail goes to a P.O. box now. It's safer that way." Her face froze for half a second. "A P.O. box? Why, that's so inconvenient. What if something important comes and we miss it?" "There's no we when it comes to my mail," I said calmly. Caleb jumped in. "Mom, Kelsey's just trying to help. You might miss a bill or something." I looked at my son with a cool clarity that shut him right up. "I've paid my bills on time for my entire life, Caleb. I don't need supervision." Kelsey threw her napkin on the table. "We allowed to be concerned. At your age, people start losing track of things." I ignored the jab, cleared my plate, and left the room. I could feel her frustration growing because she couldn't get any control over my life. Every door I closed was another loss for her. But Kelsey was stubborn. If she couldn't control the everyday stuff, she'd try something bigger. That weekend, she suddenly announced guests were coming. "My parents and my brother are coming over tonight," Kelsey announced Saturday morning like she was giving orders. "We'll eat in the big dining room. It would be great if you could make that roast beef you do so well, Mom." It wasn't a request. It was a command. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, expecting obedience. I was watering my flowers. I set the can down and looked at her calmly. I had zero intention of being demoted to kitchen staff in my own home. "I won't be here tonight," I said simply. Kelsey's jaw dropped. "What?" "But I already told them you're making your famous roast. You can't just leave." "I already have other plans," I answered matter-of-factly. I turned and went to my room. At 5 o'clock, I put on my nice gray coat, grabbed a good book, my purse, and the keys. As I walked down the hall, I could hear Kelsey banging pots around in a panic. Caleb stood there helplessly. "How long does the meat need to stay in the oven?" she yelled desperately. I didn't stop. I left a little note on the table. "The kitchen is all yours tonight. Have fun, Audrey." Then I walked out. I went to my favorite cafe on the town square, ordered a glass of red wine and a small quiche, and enjoyed the quiet while I read. I didn't think once about the chaos probably happening back at my house. When I got home around 10 o'clock, the tension was thick. The guests had already left. Kelsey was fuming on the couch. Caleb stared at the floor. The meat was tough as shoe leather. Kelsey snapped as soon as I walked in. "You embarrassed me on purpose." I hung up my coat. Whoever invites guests should know how to cook for them. I wished them good night and went to my room. Kelsey was boiling. The next day, she started a whole new strategy. The following week, I noticed the neighborhood vibe had shifted. When I walked to the bakery, Mrs. Harrove across the street gave me this overly sympathetic look. "Everything okay, Mrs. Caldwell?" she asked, dripping with fake concern. "Your daughter-in-law mentioned you'd been so forgetful lately. Did you really leave the stove on twice?" I knew exactly what game Kelsey was playing. She was spreading stories to paint me as a confused old lady who needed help. Instead of defending myself or getting upset, I just gave Mrs. Harrove a cool smile. "My stove turns itself off automatically, so don't worry. Kelsey has a very active imagination, that's all." I bought my rolls and went home. I realized I needed to make my boundaries physical, too. That same afternoon, a locksmith came while Kelsey and Caleb were at work. In an hour, he installed a solid new deadbolt on my office door where I kept important papers. When Kelsey got home that evening, she tried to barge in to use the printer like always. She rattled the handle locked. "What is this?" she yelled down the hall. I stepped out of the kitchen. "The office is off limits now. If you need to print something, there's a copy shop downtown." Her face turned red. "This is harassment. We live here." I stayed completely calm. "It's my private space." End of story. Kelsey stormed into the living room. She saw that her daily power grabs had failed completely. I didn't react to her provocations. I just acted. She needed a bigger weapon. If she wanted control of the house and the money, she'd have to get me declared incompetent. The next morning, I found something on my pillow that marked the final turning point. A glossy brochure lay on my pillow. Sunrise Meadows, a luxury assisted living for seniors. I looked at it for a moment. I didn't feel sad, just a deep cold resolve. This wasn't a helpful suggestion. It was a declaration of war. I took the brochure downstairs and dropped it straight into the recycling bin without a word. Kelsey and Caleb were already at the breakfast table. She watched my every move. "We need to talk," she said in that rehearsed authoritative tone. I poured coffee from my own machine and sat down. "I'm listening." Kelsey cleared her throat. "Caleb and I have been thinking this house is way too big for you. It's impractical and honestly dangerous for you to be here alone. We could transfer the house to Caleb for tax reasons and you could move into this lovely place. We'd handle everything, of course." Caleb stared at his plate. "It would be best for everyone." "Mom," he mumbled weakly. I took a sip of coffee and looked at my son, then at Kelsey. "No," I said calmly. Kelsey slapped the table. "What do you mean no? You're clearly overwhelmed. You lock things away. You eat alone. You forget everything. If you won't cooperate willingly, we'll have to find other ways for your own protection." It was an open threat. She wanted me declared unfit. I gave a tiny, almost invisible smile. I wasn't afraid of her empty threats. My house stays in my name. I'm not moving anywhere, and if you two don't like the living situation here, you're free to find somewhere else immediately. I stood up and rinsed my cup. Kelsey glared after me. "You'll regret this, Audrey. You're on very thin legal ice." I didn't answer. I let her think she still had the upper hand. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. 3 days later, an official-looking letter arrived at my new P.O. box. It was from a law firm Kelsey had hired. I sat on a bench outside the post office, opened it, and read carefully. The lawyer was demanding legal guardianship over me on behalf of Kelsey and Caleb. They listed all of Kelsey's mad-up stories: supposed confusion, isolation, inability to manage the household, danger to myself. The letter ended by asking the court to put the house under my son's control right away. A copy had already been sent to the probate court. I folded the letter neatly and put it back in the envelope. I wasn't shocked or sad. I just felt cold confirmation. Kelsey had gone too far and Caleb had hidden behind her like a coward. When I got home, I acted completely normal. I didn't confront them. I did my laundry, tended the garden, and read in my room that evening. Kelsey strutted around the house like she already owned it, thinking my silence meant shock and surrender. What she didn't know was that I'd made one short, precise phone call that afternoon to a probate judge I'd known for years. I asked for a quick hearing to clear this up cleanly. He agreed immediately. A week later, the summons arrived. Kelsey ripped it open triumphantly. "See," she said condescendingly. "The court wants to see you. It's over. You could have made this easy." I calmly wiped the counter. "We'll see what the judge says." I answered with zero emotion. My papers were already neatly organized in my portfolio. The hearing day was coming and Kelsey felt like she had already won. The hearing room at the courthouse was small and plain. I sat calmly with my hands in my lap. Across from me were Kelsey, Caleb, and a young, very arrogant-looking lawyer. The judge, an older man with a sharp gaze, flipped through the files. Kelsey's lawyer launched right in, painting me as a confused, stubborn old woman who desperately needed help. "My clients only want what's best for Mrs. Caldwell," he said smoothly. "She's clearly no longer capable of making rational decisions about her property." Kelsey nodded eagerly. When the judge asked a pointed question about the complete lack of medical evidence, Kelsey suddenly exploded. She leaned forward, pointed at me, and shouted, "Look at her. She doesn't even understand what's happening here. She's legally stupid." The room went dead silent. Caleb shrank in his chair. The judge slowly raised his head and gave Kelsey an icy stare. Then he turned to me. "Mrs. Caldwell, would you like to respond to these claims?" I gave a small, calm smile. I reached into my purse, took out my leather portfolio, and pulled out a small official card. I stood up slowly and handed it to the judge. "Your Honor," I said in a clear, steady voice. "I served 20 years on the disciplinary board of the State Bar Association. Before I retired, I reviewed cases of attorney misconduct exactly like what this young colleague is attempting right now." The young lawyer's eyes bulged. He stared at my credentials in the judge's hands. His face went ghost white. Kelsey looked back and forth in confusion. What? What does that mean? She asked, suddenly unsure. The lawyer wiped sweat from his forehead and jumped up. Your Honor, he stammered. I request an immediate recess. My smile widened just a little. I sat back down, crossed my legs, and waited. The hearing was paused for 10 minutes. In the hallway, you could hear muffled but furious voices. The lawyer tore into Kelsey. He hadn't known who I was, and the risk of getting reported to the bar himself over a baseless guardianship petition had him in full panic. When they came back in, Kelsey looked small and shaken. The lawyer spoke immediately. Your Honor, after consulting with my clients, we are withdrawing the guardianship petition in full. There appears to have been a regrettable misunderstanding. The judge nodded grimly. I strongly suggest you do. This case borders on coercion. Mrs. Caldwell is fully competent. The file is closed. He shot Kelsey a withering look. And you, young lady, might want to seriously rethink how you treat your mother-in-law. Back at the house, it was dead quiet. Kelsey slunk into the kitchen without a word. Caleb tried to stop me in the hallway. Mom, I'm sorry. Kelsey got carried away. We didn't mean. I raised one hand to cut him off. Save it, Caleb. You stood by and watched while someone tried to push me out of my own life. I went into my office, unlocked the door, and took out a prepared document. I walked back to the hallway where they both stood and handed it to Caleb. It was a formal 30-day notice to vacate. You have exactly 30 days to leave this house, I said coolly. Figure out another solution for your renovation. There's no longer room for you here. Kelsey stared at the paper. You're throwing out your own son? She asked, stunned and noticeably quieter than before. I'm asking two people who betrayed my trust to leave my home. I answered evenly. The 30 days start today. If you're not out, I'll have you removed. I turned and walked into the garden. I had taken back control. The next 30 days passed in icy silence. I didn't avoid them, but I only spoke when absolutely necessary. I cooked for myself, read my books, and took walks. Kelsey tried a couple half-hearted attempts to win me back. She baked a cake and offered me a slice, but I politely and firmly declined. Her manipulation bounced right off the invisible wall I'd built. Caleb spent most of his time quietly in his room or rushing to finish their apartment. He knew he had damaged our relationship beyond easy repair because he'd stayed silent for the sake of convenience. On the 30th day, a small moving van pulled up. Kelsey and Caleb carried boxes out in silence. I stood in the hallway and watched. There were no tears, no dramatic goodbyes. When the last box was loaded, Caleb came over one more time. He looked exhausted. Mom, can we ever start over someday? He asked quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. Maybe, Caleb, but not today and not tomorrow. And if we do see each other again, it will be on my terms outside this house. He nodded sadly. He knew it was fair. Kelsey was already waiting impatiently in the car. She got in without looking back. Caleb followed. The engine started and the van slowly drove down the street. I closed the front door. The familiar click of the lock sounded like freedom in the quiet hallway. I walked through my peaceful, empty house. No one was moving my things. No one was lecturing me. No one was trying to run my life. I went to my room and carried my espresso machine back to the kitchen and set it exactly where it belonged. Then I brewed a fresh cup, sat at the table, and enjoyed the smell. I was alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt strong, safe, and finally home again. I didn't win because I yelled the loudest. I won because I stayed quiet long enough for Kelsey to show the judge exactly who she was. Some people mistake patience for weakness until the documents hit the table. The whole room goes silent, and the door they tried to steal closes for good behind them.